I thought I was just washing a car, but that sweltering Saturday morning, as sudsy water cascaded down the burgundy paint of a pristine Honda Accord, I had no idea that 3 simple words, "Come inside, it's important," would shatter everything. I believed about my family and forced me to confront a truth so devastating it would change the course of 3 lives forever. My name is Tyler, and at 21, I thought I had life figured out. It was mid-July in Millbrook, sleepy suburb outside Portland, where the biggest excitement was usually Mrs. Henderson's weekly complaints about teenagers parking near her prized rose bushes. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I was home for summer break from Oregon State, trying to scrape together enough cash for next semester's textbooks by doing odd jobs around the neighborhood. The morning started like any other. I rolled out of bed around 9, stumbled to the kitchen, where Mom had left a plate of scrambled eggs and a note saying she'd gone to her Saturday yoga class. And Dad was already at the hardware store, his weekend ritual of browsing tools he didn't need but somehow always bought anyway. The house felt spacious and quiet, filled with that particular summer stillness that only exists when you're temporarily free from the chaos of college life. I was finishing my coffee when I heard the gentle rap on our front door.
Ow.
Window. I could see her Mrs. Catherine Brennan from the blue house 2 doors down. She was 49, though she could easily pass for someone a decade younger. Always impeccably dressed, even for casual Saturday errands, with shoulder length auburn hair that caught the sunlight, and a smile that seemed both warm and mysteriously guarded. "Tyler, honey," she said when I opened the door, her voice carrying that slight southern accent she'd never quite lost despite living in Oregon for over 15 years. "I hope I'm not bothering you, but I have a favor to ask, Mrs. Brennan, or Catherine." As she'd recently started insisting I call her had always been one of those neighbors who existed on the periphery of our lives. Friendly enough, always. Waved when she saw us, brought over a casserole when Dad had his gallbladder surgery last spring. But there was something about her that had always felt distant, like she was perpetually holding something back, maintaining a careful boundary that kept everyone at arm's length. "My car needs a good wash," she continued, gesturing toward her burgundy Honda Accord parked in her driveway. "I know you've been doing work around the neighborhood, and honestly, I'd rather pay someone I trust than take it to one of those automatic places that scratch the paint." The car was beautiful. 2019 model that looked like it had just rolled off the lot. Catherine clearly took meticulous care of it, and I found myself wondering why someone who obviously maintained their vehicle so well would need help with something as simple as washing it. "Sure, Mrs. Catherine," I corrected myself, seeing her gentle but firm expression. "I can do that." "When were you thinking?" "Now, if you're free," she said. And there was something in her voice and urgency that seemed disproportionate to the task at hand. "I'll pay you well, of course." $6. $75 to wash a car that was already practically spotless seemed generous to the point of suspicion. But I wasn't in a position to turn down easy money. "That works for me. Let me grab some supplies." 20 minutes later, I was standing in Catherine's driveway with a bucket of soapy water, microfiber cloths, and a hose that she'd insisted I pull from her garage rather than ours. The car was immaculate, not a speck of dirt or even dust that I could see. As I began spraying it down, I caught myself wondering if this was some kind of test. Though I couldn't imagine what she might be testing me for, Catherine appeared on her front porch with a glass of what looked like fresh lemonade, condensation already forming on the outside. She was wearing white capri pants and a light blue blouse that somehow managed to look both casual and elegant. But what struck me most was her demeanor. She seemed nervous, fidgety in a way I'd never seen before. "It's going to be a scorcher today," she called out, settling into one of her wicker porch chairs. "Make sure you stay hydrated." I nodded and waved, returning to my work. But as I moved around the car, soaping and rinsing each panel with methodical precision, I became increasingly aware of her watching me, not just occasionally glancing over, but studying me with an intensity that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The neighborhood was its usual. Saturday quiet, the distant sound of someone mowing their lawn 3 streets over, the occasional car passing by, the rhythmic chirping of sprinklers maintaining the emerald lawns that were the pride of Millbrook. Everything normal, everything as it should be. But Catherine's gaze felt different. It wasn't the casual observation of someone supervising work being done on their property. It was something more personal, more searching. Like she was looking for something specific in the way I moved, the way I concentrated on my task, maybe even the way the morning light hit my face as I worked. "You know," she said after I'd been working for about 30 minutes, her voice carrying across the driveway with an odd tremor, "you have your father's hands." I paused mid-scrub, soap dripping from the cloth in my hand. It was a strange thing to sadly intimate coming from someone who, while friendly, had never been particularly close to our family. How would she know what my father's hands looked like well enough to make such a comparison? "I'm sorry," I called back, not sure I'd heard her correctly. "Nothing," she said quickly, too quickly, just, "You're very methodical. Like Robert." My father's name hung in the air between us like a question mark. Robert Chambers' dad. How did Catherine Brennan know my father well enough to comment on his work habits? And why did saying his name seem to make her even more nervous than she'd been before? I finished washing the car in relative silence, the only sounds the splash of water and the whisper of cloth against metal. But with each passing minute, I became more aware that this wasn't really about getting a car clean. This was about something else entirely, something that involved my father and this woman in ways I couldn't begin to understand. As I dried the last water spots from the hood, Catherine stood up from her chair with what seemed like sudden determination.
"Dollar,"
she said, her voice steady now, but carrying an undertone I couldn't identify. "Could you come inside for a moment? There's something important I need to show you." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Standing there with the chamois cloth still in my hands, water droplets catching the morning sun on the immaculate hood of her car, I felt something shift. It wasn't just the invitation. It was the way she said it. Something important. "Would you like some water? Or let me get your money? Something important." "Sure," I heard myself saying, though every instinct was telling me to politely decline. "Take my $75 and head home. Just let me put these away." "Leave them," Catherine said quickly. "They'll be fine." I set the cloth and bucket beside the car and followed her up the walkway to her front door. I'd never been inside Catherine's house before. In 15 years of being neighbors, our interactions had been limited to driveway conversations, the occasional borrowed cup of sugar, and polite waves across the fence. Now, stepping through her front door felt like crossing into foreign territory. The interior was exactly what I'd expected, and nothing like it at the same time. Everything was tasteful: coordinated sage-green walls, cream-colored furniture, family photos in silver frames arranged with geometric precision on built-in shelves. But there was something almost museum-like about it, as if it were designed to be admired rather than lived in. "Can I get you something to drink?" Catherine asked, but her voice had that same nervous tremor I'd noticed outside. "I'm fine, thanks." She gestured toward the living room. "Please sit." I settled onto her cream-colored sofa, hyper-aware of my still damp hands and the possibility of leaving watermarks on her pristine furniture. Catherine remained standing, pacing slightly in front of the fireplace where several framed photographs caught my attention. Most were standard family photos Catherine with what appeared to be relatives at various gatherings, holiday scenes, graduation pictures. But one frame, positioned slightly apart from the others, held a photo that made my chest tighten with confusion. It was Catherine, but a much younger version, maybe in her early 20s. She was laughing, her head thrown back with pure joy, and standing beside her with his arm around her waist was a man who looked remarkably like my father. Not exactly like him, but close enough to be unsettling. Same build, same dark hair, same easy smile that Dad wore in his old college photos. "Catherine," I said slowly, nodding toward the photo. "Who is that?" She followed my gaze and her face went pale. For a moment, she looked like she might deny seeing what I was looking at or deflect with some casual explanation. Instead, she walked over to the mantel and picked up the frame with hands that were visibly shaking. "That's why I asked you to come in," she said quietly. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. I could hear the tick of a grandfather clock in the hallway, the distant hum of her air conditioning, the sound of my own heartbeat drumming in my ears. I don't understand, I said, though part of me was beginning to suspect I understood all too well. Catherine set the photo down and turned to face me fully. Tyler, what I'm about to tell you is going to sound impossible. You're going to think I'm confused or lying or maybe just crazy. But I need you to listen to the whole story before you make any judgments. I nodded, not trusting my voice. That photo was taken 23 years ago, the summer of 2001. I was 26, working as a nurse at Good Samaritan Hospital in downtown Portland. I'd just moved here from Atlanta, didn't know a soul, was trying to start over after a particularly messy breakup. She paused, running her fingers through her auburn hair, a gesture that seemed more nervous than habitual. I met him at a coffee shop on Burnside. He was reading a Stephen King novel, Salem's Lot, and I made some comment about how it was my favorite book. We started talking, and before I knew it, we'd spent 4 hours just connecting. He was 25, working construction, saving money to go back to school for engineering. My mouth felt dry. The man in the photo wasn't just similar to my father. The more I looked at it, the more convinced I became that it was my father, but that was impossible. Dad had met Mom in college when they were both 19. They'd been together ever since. 23 years ago, Dad would have been 25, but he was already with Mom. They'd been dating for 6 years by then. His name, Catherine continued, her voice barely above a whisper, was Robert Chambers. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the breath leave my lungs in a rush. That's impossible, I said, standing up abruptly. My parents have been together since college. My dad never lived in Portland before we moved here when I was 6. You're mistaken, or Tyler, please. Catherine's voice was gentle but firm. I know how this sounds. Believe me, I've questioned my own memory 1,000 times over the years, but it's not a mistake. She walked over to a small secretary desk in the corner of the room and pulled out a manila folder. I have letters, photos, a key to an apartment we shared for 3 months. The room began to spin slightly. Shared an apartment on Maple Street near the hospital. A little one-bedroom place with terrible plumbing and the most beautiful view of the river you've ever seen. Her voice had taken on a dreamy quality, as if she were remembering something precious and painful at the same time. I sat back down heavily, my mind racing to process what she was telling me. If this was true, if my father had lived with another woman, had a whole relationship I knew nothing about, then everything I thought I knew about my family was built on lies. Why are you telling me this? I asked, and my voice sounded strange, distant. Catherine returned to the mantel and picked up the photograph again, staring at it with an expression I couldn't read. Because she said there's more to the story. And after carrying this secret for over 2 decades, I think it's time someone in your family knew the truth. She looked at me directly then, and I saw something in her eyes that made my stomach clench with dread. Tyler, your father didn't just leave me, left us. The word us hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I felt my vision blur at the edges, and for a moment, I thought I might actually pass out. Catherine was still holding the photograph, but now she was looking at me with an expression that was part pity, part determination, and something else I couldn't identify. Us, managed to croak out. Catherine set the frame down carefully and returned to the manila folder she'd retrieved from the desk. Her movements were deliberate now, as if she'd crossed some internal threshold, and there was no going back. I was pregnant, Tyler. The words landed like physical blows. I gripped the arms of the sofa, feeling like the room was tilting on its axis. I found out 3 weeks after Robert disappeared. Just ... Vanished one day while I was at work, left his clothes, his books, even his toothbrush. The only thing missing was him and that damn Stephen King novel he'd been reading when we met. She pulled out what looked like a medical document from the folder, her hands steadier now than they'd been since I arrived. I tried to find him. Called every construction company in the city, checked with the engineering schools he'd mentioned. Even hired a private investigator with money I didn't have. It was like he'd never existed. I couldn't speak. My throat felt like it was closing, my mind racing through the implications of what she was telling me. If this was true, if my father had been with Catherine in 2001, if she'd been pregnant... Baby, I whispered. Catherine's composure finally cracked. Tears began streaming down her face, but her voice remained steady. I lost him at 18 weeks. Complications from the stress, the doctor said. Too much emotional trauma. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I named him David, even though he never. I still think about what he would have looked like, whether he would have had Robert's eyes. The room was spinning now. I stood up abruptly, needing air, needing space, needing anything other than the suffocating weight of this revelation. This is insane, I said, pacing toward the window. You're telling me my father had an affair, got you pregnant, and then just disappeared? While he was dating my mother? Not an affair, Catherine said quietly. Tyler, I don't think your father was with your mother when we were together. I turned to face her. What do you mean? She opened the folder again and pulled out a stack of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. These are letters Robert wrote to me during the 3 months we lived together. He talked about his past, his family, his dreams. He never once mentioned having a girlfriend. She untied the ribbon and selected one of the letters, unfolding it carefully. Listen to this, Catherine. I've never felt this way about anyone before. You make me believe in the possibility of forever, in this one. I know we've only been together a few months, but I can see us growing old together, maybe even having a family someday. Each word felt like a knife twisting in my chest. The handwriting on the letters was unmistakably my father's, the same careful script I'd seen on birthday cards and report card signatures my entire life. Tyler, I think your father met your mother after he left me. After he found out about the pregnancy. That's impossible, I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I was doing the math. If Catherine had been pregnant in late 2001, if the baby had been lost at 18 weeks, that would put Dad's disappearance sometime in the summer of 2001, and I was born in March of 2003, which meant your parents got married in December of 2001, Catherine said softly, reading my expression. I know because I saw the announcement in the newspaper. I'd been looking for Robert for months. Then suddenly there he was in the wedding announcements, marrying someone named Janet Morrison. The name hit me like a slap. Morrison was my mother's maiden name. Made 6 months, I said, more to myself than to her. He left you and married my mother 6 months later. 5 months and 3 weeks, Catherine corrected. And the precision of her memory told me she'd calculated this date many times over the years. I counted. I sank back onto the sofa, my mind struggling to process the timeline. Everything I'd believed about my parents' relationship, about their college romance, about the story they'd told me about meeting in calculus class and dating for 8 years before getting married, it was all lies. Why didn't you contact him? I asked. When you saw the wedding announcement, why didn't you tell him about the pregnancy? Catherine's face darkened, because by then it was too late. David was already gone, and Robert had clearly moved on. What was I supposed to do? Destroy his new marriage by telling him about the baby he'd never known existed? She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street where my father drove past twice a day on his way to and from work. I thought about it, believe me, especially when I found out your family was moving to this neighborhood. When I realized Robert Chambers with his new wife and baby son were going to be living 2 houses away from me. My blood ran cold. You knew we were moving here, I knew. Her voice was barely above a whisper. The real estate agent was a friend of mine from the hospital. She mentioned the Chambers family was looking at houses in Millbrook, described them successful. Engineer, pretty wife, toddler son. I put it together. The full weight of what she was telling me crashed down like an avalanche. You've been watching us. For 15 years, you've been living 2 doors down from us, watching me grow up, watching Dad. I couldn't help myself, Catherine said, turning back to face me. You look so much like him, even as a little boy. Same dark hair, the same serious expression when you were concentrating on something. I used to watch you playing in your backyard and wonder what David would have looked like at that age. The room felt like it was closing in on me. Everything I thought I knew about my life, about my family, about the woman who'd brought me casseroles and waved at me from her garden, was built on a foundation of lies and obsession. "This is sick," I said, standing up again. "You've been stalking my family for 15 years. "No," Catherine said firmly. "I've been living my life in the only way I could figure out how." "Do you think it was easy watching Robert build the family with your mother that we talked about having together? Do you think it didn't kill me? Little bit every time I saw him teaching you to ride a bike or throwing a baseball with you in the yard?" Tears were streaming down her face again, but there was anger in her voice now too. "I stayed quiet, Tyler. For 15 years I kept this secret. I watched your father become the man I thought he was, watched him be a good husband and father, and I never once interfered. Never once tried to disrupt the life he'd built on the ruins of ours. Then why now?" I demanded. "Why are you telling me this now?" Catherine wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders. "Because last month I was diagnosed with breast cancer." The anger that had been building inside me suddenly evaporated, replaced by a cold, hollow feeling. "It's aggressive," she continued. "The doctors are optimistic, but there are no guarantees. And I realize that if something happens to me, this secret dies with me. Your father gets to keep living his lie, and you never get to know the truth about who he really is." She walked back to the mantel and picked up the photograph again. "I'm not telling you this to hurt you, Tyler. I'm telling you because you deserve to know. Because David deserved better than to just disappear as if he never mattered. And because I think deep down, your father has been carrying this guilt for 23 years, and maybe it's time he faced what he did." I looked at her standing there, clutching that old photograph. And for the first time since I'd walked into her house, I saw her clearly. Not as the neighbor who'd watched me grow up with some sick fascination, but as a woman who'd lost everything: her lover, her child, her chance at the future she'd imagined, and had somehow found the strength to live with that loss for over 2 decades. "What do you want from me?" I asked quietly. Catherine set the photograph down and looked at me with eyes that held 23 years of pain. "I want you to talk to your father. I want you to ask him about the summer of 2001, about a nurse named Catherine from Atlanta who loved Stephen King novels and made the best chicken and dumplings he'd ever tasted." She paused, her voice breaking slightly. "And I want you to tell him about David." I stared at Catherine for what felt like an eternity, my mind reeling from everything she'd just revealed. The name David echoed in my head, the brother I'd never known existed, the child who died before I was even conceived. The weight of carrying this information to my father felt impossibly heavy. "I can't," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "I can't just walk up to my dad and destroy his entire life based on old letters and photographs." Catherine's expression softened, but there was steel underneath it. "Tyler, I'm not asking you to destroy anything. I'm asking you to give him the chance to finally tell the truth." She walked back to the secretary desk and pulled out something else from the manila folder, small silver key attached to a keychain with a miniature space needle on it. "This is the key to our apartment on Maple Street," she said, holding it out toward me. "The building's still there, apartment for B." The landlord was an elderly man named Giuseppe, who made the most incredible marinara sauce. He used to bring us jars of it because he said we were too skinny. I didn't take the key. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I want you to understand that what Robert and I had wasn't some casual fling or one-night stand. We lived together. We planned a future together. We're going to get married after he finished school." She set the key down on the coffee table between us, where it seemed to gleam with accusation. "The morning he disappeared, I woke up and found a note on his pillow. Just 2 lines. I'm sorry. Can't do this." I thought he meant he couldn't handle the pressure of school and work in our relationship. I had no idea he was talking about the baby. "Wait," I said, my head snapping up. "He knew about the pregnancy?" Catherine's face crumpled slightly. "I told him the night before. I was so excited, so nervous. I'd made his favorite dinner pot, roast with those little carrots he loved, and I waited until dessert to tell him. I thought he'd be happy." 8. She sat down heavily on the chair across from me, suddenly looking every one of her 49 years. He went very quiet, just sat there staring at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. Then he smiled this strange, tight smile and said, "That's wonderful, Catherine. It's really wonderful." But his eyes, She shook her head. His eyes looked terrified. I felt sick. The picture she was painting of my father, a man who had abandoned a pregnant woman in the middle of the night, was so far from the dad. I knew that it felt like she was talking about a stranger. Maybe he was just scared, I said, grasping for some explanation that would make this bearable. People panic when they find out they're going to be parents. It doesn't mean Tyler. Catherine's voice cut through my desperate rationalization. I found his journals. She reached into the folder one more time and pulled out a composition notebook, the kind we used to use in elementary school. The cover was faded and worn, and I could see my father's handwriting on the label. R. Chambers 2001. He left this behind with everything else. I probably shouldn't have read it, but I was trying to understand why he'd left. I thought maybe there were clues, some explanation that would help me make sense of what happened. She opened the notebook to a page marked with a yellowed sticky. Note: this is from July 15th, 2001. 3 days before he told me about the pregnancy. She cleared her throat and began to read. I've been thinking about Janet a lot lately. I know I shouldn't. What Catherine and I have is good, maybe even great. But I can't stop wondering what would have happened if I hadn't left school, if I'd stayed and fought for what we had instead of running away like a coward. Catherine deserves better than someone who's still hung up on his ex-girlfriend. She deserves someone who can love her completely without reservations. I think I need to end this before I hurt her more than I already have. The words hit me like a physical blow. Janet, my mother's name. He'd been thinking about leaving Catherine for my mother even before he knew about the pregnancy. There's more, Catherine said, flipping through a few more pages. July 18th, the day after I told him about the baby. I've ruined everything. Catherine is pregnant, and all I can think about is Janet. What kind of monster does that make me? Catherine is talking about cribs and baby names, and I'm planning my escape. I called Janet yesterday. She's still single, still living with her parents in Eugene. She sounded happy to hear from me, I think. I think there might still be a chance. For us. But what about Catherine? What about the baby? God help me. I don't know what to do. Catherine closed the notebook and looked at me with eyes full of old pain. The next entry is dated July 20th. Just one line. I have to choose. Catherine. I felt like I was drowning. I thought I knew about my parents' love story the way my father always talked about my mother like she was the only woman he'd ever loved. The way they seemed so perfectly matched was built on the foundation of betrayal and abandonment. He went back to her, I said, the pieces finally clicking into place. He left you and went back to my mother. Within a week, Catherine confirmed. I know because I did something pathetic and called the university in Eugene, pretending to be a potential employer, checking his references. They told me he'd re-enrolled for the fall semester. She stood up and walked to the window again, looking out at the street where our families had lived as neighbors for 15 years. Your parents were married 4 months later. You were born. Less than 2 years after that, he got everything he wanted, the woman he really loved, the family he'd dreamed of, the life he'd planned before he met me. And you got nothing? I said quietly. Catherine turned back to me, and for the first time since this conversation began, she smiled, a sad, broken smile that didn't reach her eyes. I got you, she said. Not the way I'd planned, not the way I'd dreamed, but I got to watch you grow up. I got to see what David might have looked like, how he might have sounded when he laughed, what kind of man he might have become. Of her words settled over me like a shroud. For 15 years, this woman had been living with the ghost of her lost child while watching me. The son of the man who'd abandoned her become the person her David would never be. Catherine, I said, standing up slowly. I need some time to process all of this. She nodded. Of course. This is a lot to take in. I started toward the door, then stopped and turned back to her. The cancer, I said. Are you going to be okay? Touched her chest absently, and I realized this might be why she'd chosen today to tell me everything. Time was running out. I start chemotherapy next week, she said. The doctors are cautiously optimistic. Tyler, that's not why I'm telling you this now. Then why? Catherine picked up the photograph of her and my father one more time, studying it like she was trying to memorize every detail. Because I'm tired of carrying this alone. Because your father deserves the chance to finally face what he did. Maybe finding out about David will destroy him, or maybe it will set him free. Either way, it's not my choice to make anymore. She looked at me directly, and I saw something in her expression that made my chest tighten. It's yours. I walked out of Catherine's house in a daze, the manila folder tucked under my arm like a bomb waiting to explode. She'd insisted I take it. The letters, the photographs, the journal, even that silver key that seemed to weigh more than it should. Evidence, she'd called it. But it felt more like a burden I wasn't sure I was strong enough to carry. The afternoon sun felt different somehow. Harsher. As if the light itself had changed while I was inside learning about the secret life my father had lived before I existed. I stood on Catherine's front walkway for a long moment, looking at our house 2 doors down, the same house I'd grown up in, where my parents had built what I'd always believed was a perfect marriage. The burgundy Honda sat in the driveway behind me, still gleaming from the wash I'd given it what felt like a lifetime ago. The bucket and cloths were exactly where I'd left them, but everything else had shifted. The neighborhood looked the same: Mrs. Henderson's roses, the Patel's immaculate lawn, the Johnsons' kids' bikes scattered on their driveway, but I felt like I was seeing it all through different eyes. I couldn't go home yet, not with this folder burning against my ribs, not with David's name echoing in my head, not with the image of my father writing in that journal about abandoning a pregnant woman. I needed time to think, to process, too. Figure out what the hell I was going to do with this information. I found myself walking toward Riverside Park, a small green space about 6 blocks from our neighborhood where I used to go as a kid when I needed to escape the suffocating perfection of suburban life. It had a duck pond, some old oak trees, and a bench where you could sit and watch the world go by without anyone bothering you. The park was mostly empty, just an elderly man feeding bread to the ducks and a young mother pushing her toddler on the swings. I claimed my old bench and opened the folder with trembling hands, as if I could somehow make sense of it all by examining the evidence again. The photographs were the worst part. There were dozens of them. Catherine and my father at restaurants, on hiking trails, curled up together on a couch I didn't recognize. In every single one they looked happy. Not just content or comfortable, but genuinely, radiantly happy. The way my father looked at Catherine in these pictures was the same way I'd seen him look at my mother 1,000 times. And that realization made my stomach churn. I picked up one of the letters and unfolded it carefully. The paper was yellowed with age, but Dad's handwriting was as clear as if he'd written it yesterday. Catherine. I know you think I'm crazy for leaving you little notes when we live in the same apartment, but I can't help myself. Waking up next to you this morning and watching you sleep, I realized I've never been this happy in my entire life. You make me want to be better than I am. You make me believe in forever. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person. Always yours, Robert. I had to stop reading. The intimacy of it, the raw emotion was too much. This wasn't some casual relationship or rebound romance. This was love, deep and real and devastating in its authenticity. My phone buzzed. Text from Mom. Dad's back from the hardware store. Family barbecue at 5? Burgers and corn on the cob? The normalcy of the message felt surreal. Here I was, sitting on a park bench with evidence of my father's secret life spread across my lap, and my mother was texting me about burgers and corn on the cob. The disconnect was almost laughable. I looked at my watch. It was 3:30. In an hour and a half. I was supposed to sit around our backyard with my parents, making small talk about my summer classes and Dad's latest home improvement project, all while carrying the knowledge that our entire family history was built on lies. I pulled out Dad's journal and flipped through it more carefully this time. Most of the entries from early 2001 were mundane work complaints. Notes about school assignments, observations about Portland's endless rain. But as the summer progressed, the entries became more conflicted, more tortured. June 2nd, Catherine made her famous chicken and dumplings tonight. Giuseppe from downstairs came by with more of his marinara sauce. Sometimes I think this is what happiness feels like. Just ordinary moments with someone who makes everything better. But then I think about Janet, about the life I walked away from, and I wonder if I'm just running from my problems again. June 15th, I called the university in Eugene today. Just to check on my transcripts, I told myself, but really I wanted to know if Janet was still there. She's not. Graduated last month with her nursing degree. Part of me was relieved. Part of me was devastated. July 1st, Catherine mentioned wanting kids someday. We were walking by the playground near the hospital, watching some parents with their toddlers, and she got this wistful look on her face. I think I'd be a good mom, she said. I agreed because she would be. She'd be amazing. But all I could think about was Janet saying the same thing 3 years ago, how we'd planned to have 4 kids and a dog and a house with a white picket fence. Why can't I let go of the past? The progression was heartbreaking. Here was my father, torn between 2 women, unable to fully commit to either one, and Catherine, completely unaware that she was competing with a ghost. I closed the journal and stared out at the duck pond, where a family of mallards was swimming in lazy circles. A father duck, a mother duck, and 3 ducklings following in. Perfect formation, such a simple picture of family unity, so different from the complicated mess I was drowning in. My phone rang. Dad's number. Hey Tyler, your mom said she texted you about dinner. You're planning to join us? His voice was exactly the same warm, slightly gruff, with that hint of amusement it always carried when he was looking forward to grilling something. The voice of the man who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd stayed up all night helping me build a volcano for my 5th grade science project, who'd driven 3 hours to watch me play in a college baseball game that lasted 2 innings before getting rained out. Yeah, I managed. I'll be there. Oh, great. I picked up some of those fancy burger buns you like. The ones with the sesame seeds. Such a small thing. Remembering that I preferred sesame seed buns. Such a dad thing to do. And yet this was the same man who'd abandoned a pregnant woman 23 years ago to chase after his ex-girlfriend. Tyler, you still there? Yeah, sorry, just ... distracted. Everything okay? You sound off? For a moment, I considered telling him everything right then and there, just blurting out Catherine's name and watching his reaction. But something held me back. Maybe cowardice, maybe wisdom. Be just the knowledge that once I said the words, there would be no taking them back. I'm fine, I lied. Just tired. I'll see you in an hour. I'm looking forward to it, son. Son. The word hit me like a punch to the gut. I was his son, but David would have been too. David, who'd never gotten the chance to hear that word, who'd never gotten sesame seed burger buns or help with science projects or any of the 1,000 small acts of love that make up a father-son relationship. I gathered up the papers and photos and stuffed them back into the folder. The weight of Catherine's secret was mine now, and I had exactly 1 hour to decide what to do with it. 1 hour to figure out how to look my father in the eye. Knowing what I now knew about who he really was, I made it home with 10 minutes to spare before the barbecue, the manila folder hidden in my bedroom closet behind my old baseball equipment. As I walked through our front door, the familiar smell of home, my mother's vanilla candles mixed with the lingering scent of Dad's morning. Coffee felt foreign, like I was an intruder in someone else's life. Tyler, perfect timing, Mom called from the kitchen. She was at the counter, slicing tomatoes for burgers, her blonde hair pulled back in the same ponytail she'd worn for as long as I could remember. Your father's already outside getting the grill started. He's been excited about this all day. Forced a smile. Great. Need any help? Let's grab the corn from the fridge. I already husked it. As I moved around the kitchen where I'd eaten thousands of meals, done homework at the counter, received countless hugs and lectures, I felt like I was seeing it through a stranger's eyes. The family photos on the refrigerator told a story I now knew was incomplete. Wedding pictures of my parents looking young and radiant, baby photos of me, Christmas mornings, birthday parties, family vacations. But nowhere in this carefully curated gallery was there any hint of Catherine Brennan or a child named David who would never see his first birthday. Tyler, Mom's voice snapped me back to the present. The corn. Right, sorry. I grabbed the corn and headed outside to our backyard, where Dad was standing over the Weber grill, poking at the coals with scientific precision. He looked exactly like he always did on barbecue nights, faded jeans, his favorite Oregon State t-shirt, that ridiculous apron Mom had given him for Father's Day that said Grill Sergeant. There's my sous chef, he said with a grin, ready to witness some culinary magic. Looking at him now, Searched his face for signs of the guilt Catherine insisted he'd been carrying for 23 years. But all I saw was my dad, the man who'd taught me to throw a spiral, who'd stayed up all night when I had the flu, who'd cried when I graduated high school. If he was haunted by his past, he hid it well. "Dad," I said, setting the corn on the patio table, "can I ask you something?" "Shoot. Have you ever? Do you ever think about the path not taken? Like what your life would have been like if you'd made different choices?" He paused in his coal arrangement and looked at me with raised eyebrows. "That's pretty philosophical for a Saturday barbecue. You writing a paper or something?" "Just curious." Dad straightened up and leaned against the grill, considering the question seriously. "I suppose everyone does sometimes. But honestly, Tyler, I can't imagine any other life than the one I have. Your mother, you, this house, this neighborhood, it all feels inevitable, you know? Like everything I did before was just leading me. Here, the casual certainty in his voice made my chest tighten. Here was a man who seemed genuinely convinced that his life had unfolded exactly as it was meant to, with no acknowledgement of the wreckage he'd left behind. "But what about before Mom?" I pressed. "You must have dated other people." Dad's expression shifted slightly, a shadow passing across his features so quickly I almost missed it. "A few people? Sure. Nothing serious." "Nothing serious," I repeated. "Tyler, where is this coming from?" Before I could answer, Mom appeared with a tray of burger patties and her usual perfect timing for interrupting difficult conversations. "Hope. You boys are ready to eat," she said cheerfully. "I made extra patties in case we want leftovers tomorrow." As Dad fired up the grill and Mom bustled around arranging condiments, I found myself studying them both with new eyes. My parents had always seemed like the ideal couple, still holding hands after 23 years of marriage, still laughing at each other's jokes, still choosing to sit next to each other on the couch even when there was plenty of room to spread out. But now I was seeing the cracks. The way Dad's smile faltered when he thought no one was looking. The way Mom sometimes got that distant expression, as if she was remembering something she'd rather forget. Had she always known something was wrong? Had she spent their entire marriage competing with ghosts she couldn't name? "Tyler's been asking deep questions about the path not taken," Dad said as he placed the first burger on the grill. "I told him I can't imagine any other life than this one." Mom's hand paused as she was opening a bottle of beer. Just for a second, but I caught it. "Well," she said carefully, "I think we all have moments we'd rather forget. It's the important thing, is learning from them and moving forward." The words hung in the air, loaded with subtext I was only beginning to understand. Did she know? Had she always known about Catherine, about the pregnancy, about the reason my father had come back too? Her with such desperate determination? Like what kind of moments? Found myself asking. Both my parents looked at me sharply, as if I'd asked something inappropriate. "Tyler," Mom said gently, "some things are better left in the past. But what if they're not really in the past?" I pressed. "What if they're still affecting the present?" Dad flipped a burger with more force than necessary. "Son, I'm not sure what's brought this on, but I met someone today," I interrupted. "Someone who knows our family, someone who's been watching us for years." The temperature in the backyard seemed to drop 10 degrees. Dad's spatula froze mid-flip, and Mom set her beer down so hard it foamed over. "Who?" Dad's voice was barely above a whisper. I looked at both of them, my parents, the people who'd raised me. Who'd shaped every fundamental belief I had about love and loyalty and family, and realized there was no going back from what I was about to say. Catherine Brennan. From the blue house on Maple Street, Dad's face went completely white. The burger. He'd been flipping, fell off the spatula, and hit the grill with a sizzle that sounded like a scream. "Robert." Mom's voice was sharp, urgent. "Who is Catherine Brennan?" But Dad wasn't looking at Mom. He was staring at me with an expression of absolute terror, as if I'd just pronounced a death sentence. "How do you know that name?" he whispered. "She lives 2 doors down, Dad. She's lived there for 15 years. She asked me to wash her car today. Oh, God." Dad sank onto one of the patio chairs, his head in his hands. "Oh, God, oh, God, oh, God." Mom moved quickly to his side, her hand on his shoulder, but her eyes were locked on mine. "Tyler, what is going on? Who is Catherine Brennan?" I looked at my father, hunched over in his chair like a man who'd just received devastating news, and felt a mixture of pity and rage that made my hands shake. "Why don't you tell her, Dad?" It quietly. Tell her about the summer of 2001. Tell her about the apartment on Maple Street. Tell her about Giuseppe's marinara sauce and Stephen King novels in Salem's Lot. With each detail, Dad seemed to shrink further into himself. Tell her about David. At the mention of the name, Dad's head snapped. I looked at my father, hunched over in his chair like a man who'd just received devastating news, and felt a mixture of pity and rage that made my hands shake. "Why don't you tell her, Dad?" It quietly. Tell her about the summer of 2001. Tell her about the apartment on Maple Street. Tell her about Giuseppe's marinara sauce and Stephen King novels in Salem's Lot. With each detail, Dad seemed to shrink further into himself. Tell her about David. At the mention of the name, Dad's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock and something that looked like grief. "How do you know about David?" he breathed. And that's when I knew, with absolute certainty, that every word Catherine had told me was true. Because I said, my voice steady, despite the earthquake happening in my chest, "The mother of your first child wanted to finally tell someone her story." The silence that followed my words was deafening. Dad remained hunched in his chair, his face buried in his hands, while Mom stood frozen beside him, her hand still on his shoulder, but her entire body rigid with shock. The abandoned burger continued to sizzle on the grill, filling the air with the smell of burning meat. "Robert." Mom's voice was deadly quiet. "Look at me." Dad slowly raised his head, and I saw tears streaming down his face. In 21 years, I had seen my father cry exactly twice, when his own father died, and when I broke my arm in 3 places during a high school football game. But this was different. This wasn't grief or fear. This was the look of a man whose entire world was collapsing. "Janet, I don't." Mom stepped back from him, her hand dropping to her side. "Don't you dare say my name until you tell me who Catherine Brennan is." Dad looked between Mom and me, as if hoping one of us might offer him an escape route. None came. He seemed to age 10 years in 10 seconds. She was someone I knew before we got back together," he said finally. "Before we got married?" "Got back together?" interrupted. "I mean, you and Mom weren't together continuously?" "Since college." Mom's face had gone pale. "Robert, what is he talking about?" "We dated all through college, and got married right after graduation." "No," Dad said quietly. "We didn't." The word hung in the air like an accusation. Mom sank into the chair across from Dad, her legs seemingly unable to support her. "We broke. Up junior year," Dad continued, his voice barely audible. "You said you needed space, that you weren't sure what you wanted. You were thinking about going to graduate school in California, maybe staying there permanently. So I left school. You dropped out because of me?" Mom's voice was incredulous. "I couldn't handle being on campus, seeing you every day, knowing you were pulling away. So I moved to Portland, got a job in construction, figured I'd start over completely." I watched my mother's face as she processed this information. The story she'd been telling herself for 23 years, the story she'd told me countless times about their perfect college romance, was crumbling before her eyes. "That's when you met Catherine," I said. Dad nodded miserably. "At a coffee shop. She was new in town, didn't know anyone. We started talking, and she was ... She was amazing. Kind, funny, brilliant. I thought I'd lost when your mother and I broke up." "How long?" Mom asked. "How long were you with her?" 3 months. We lived together for 3 months." "Lived together?" Mom's voice rose. "You moved in with another woman?" "I thought it was over between us, Janet. I thought you'd made your choice." "So you made yours," Mom said bitterly. "It wasn't like that," Dad protested. But even as he said it, I could hear how hollow it sounded. "I loved her. But when you called me that summer, when you said you'd made a mistake and wanted to try again, ... double quotes, I called you." Mom looked confused. "Robert, you called me. You showed up at my parents' house begging me to take you back." Dad's face crumpled. "Because you'd called first. Said you missed me, that you'd been thinking about us, that maybe California wasn't what you wanted after all." I watched my parents stare at each other across the patio table, both of them realizing that their foundational story, the narrative they'd built their entire... She's already in this, I exploded. She's been in this for 15 years, living 2 doors down from us, watching you play happy family while she carries the secret of what you did to her. What did he do? Mom demanded, looking between us. Looked at my father, giving him one last chance to tell the truth himself. When he remained silent, I made the choice for him. She was pregnant, Mom. Catherine was pregnant with Dad's child when he abandoned her. The color drained from Mom's face so quickly I thought she might faint. Pregnant? The baby died, I continued, watching Dad flinch at every word. At 18 weeks, the stress of being abandoned, according to her doctor, lost Dad's son. While Dad was here, starting over with you? Mom stood up abruptly, swaying slightly. I need ... I need a minute. She walked toward the house, then stopped and turned back to Dad. How long have you known she lived here? Since we moved in, Dad admitted. I recognized her car in the driveway. I thought about saying something, but then years passed and it seemed easier to just ... Pretend she didn't exist, Mom finished. Pretend your son didn't exist. Our son didn't exist either, I said. Not when you got back together. I wasn't born until almost 2 years later. So what was that about? Guilt? Making sure you could? Give Mom the family you'd promised Catherine? Dad looked at me with an expression of pure anguish. Tyler, you weren't? You weren't some replacement baby? You were wanted. You were planned. Your mother and I, we genuinely wanted to start a family. After you'd already destroyed one? We didn't know, Dad shouted, standing up so quickly his chair fell over. We didn't know Catherine had been pregnant. We didn't know about David until you walked out here and said his name. The admission hung in the air between us. For a moment, I almost believed him. The devastation on his face when I'd mentioned David's name had seemed genuine, raw, immediate. But then I remembered Catherine's manila folder and the evidence that contradicted everything he was saying. That's not true, I said quietly. Yes, it is. Tyler, I swear to you, I had no idea. I have your journal.
Dad?
From 2001? I know you knew about the pregnancy before you left. Dad's face went white again. She kept that. She kept everything. The letters you wrote her. It's the key to your apartment. Photos of the two of you looking happier than I've ever seen you look with anyone, including Mom. I glanced toward the house where Mom had disappeared. And now I have to decide whether to show them to her too. Dad grabbed my arm, his grip desperate. Tyler, please, your mother doesn't need to see those things. It would destroy her, like you destroyed Catherine. I was 25 years old. Dad's voice cracked. I was scared and confused, and I made terrible choices. But I can't change what happened. All I can do is try to protect the family I have now. I stared at him. This man who'd raised me, who'd been my hero for 2 decades. What about the family you had then? What about David? What about Catherine? Dad released my arm and sank back into his chair. What do you want me to say, Tyler? That I think about them every day? I've regretted leaving the way I did for 23 years? Because I have. But what good would it do to destroy everything now? Maybe, I said, it's not about what good it would do. Maybe it's about what damage has already been done by keeping secrets. Before Dad could respond, Mom appeared in the doorway, her face composed, but her eyes red-rimmed. I want to meet her, she said simply. Janet? No, Dad started. I want to meet the woman whose life you destroyed to build ours. I want to do it tonight. It's the 20 minutes that followed. Mom's declaration were some of the most surreal of my life. Dad sat in stunned silence while Mom methodically cleaned up the abandoned barbecue, scraping the burnt burger off the grill and putting away the untouched condiments with mechanical precision. I found myself caught between them, uncertain whether I should be proud of my mother's strength or terrified of what was about to unfold. Janet, please. Dad tried again, as Mom folded the tablecloth with sharp, efficient movements. You don't understand what you're asking for, don't I? Mom's voice was eerily calm. You lived with another woman, got her pregnant, and then abandoned her to come back to me. I think I understand perfectly. You're angry. You're not thinking clearly. Mom stopped folding and looked at him with an expression I'd never seen before. calculating, and utterly without the warmth that had defined her for as long as I'd known her. Robert. I've spent 23 years married to a man who apparently left another woman devastated and grieving to be with me. I've raised a son who grew up 2 doors down from the woman whose child you killed through abandonment. I think anger is the least appropriate response I could have. The word killed hung in the air like a slap. Dad visibly recoiled, and I felt something twist in my stomach. Catherine had said the miscarriage was caused by stress, but hearing Mom put it so bluntly made the weight of it hit differently. The baby's death wasn't Dad started. Wasn't your fault? Mom's composure finally cracked, her voice rising. You left a pregnant woman without warning or explanation. What did you think would happen? I watched my father struggle to find words that would somehow make this bearable, that would transform him from villain back to the man I'd looked up to my entire life. But there were no such words. I was young, he said weakly. I was scared. Catherine was young too, I said. She was scared too. She didn't have the luxury of running away. Dad looked at me with something that might have been pleading in his eyes. Tyler, I know how this looks, but you have to understand. I understand perfectly, I interrupted. I understand that you're a coward. I understand that when things got complicated, you chose the easier path. And I understand that you've been lying to Mom and me our entire lives about who you really are. The words came out harsher than I'd intended, but I couldn't take them back. And looking at Dad's stricken face, I wasn't sure I wanted to. Mom finished her methodical cleanup and turned to face both of us. Tyler, you said Catherine lives on Maple Street? The blue house? It's 2 doors down? Then let's go. Dad stood up abruptly. Absolutely not. I won't let you humiliate yourself you won't let me. Mom's voice dropped to a whisper that was somehow more terrifying than shouting. Robert, you lost the right to let me do anything the moment you decided to build our marriage on. A foundation of lies. She started walking toward the house, then paused and looked back at me. Tyler, are you coming? I glanced at Dad, who looked like he was about to collapse. Part of me, part that had spent 21 years loving and respecting this man, wanted to protect him from what was about to happen. But a larger part, the part that kept thinking about David and Catherine and all the years of silent suffering, knew that this confrontation was long overdue. Yeah, I said. I'm coming. Tyler, please. Dad grabbed my arm as I passed him. Don't do this. Think about what this will do to our family. I stopped and looked at him directly. What family, Dad? The one built on lies? Or the one you destroyed 23 years ago? His grip loosened, and I walked toward the house, leaving him standing alone in our backyard, among the scattered remnants of what was supposed to have been a perfect family barbecue. Inside, Mom was in the hallway mirror, fixing her hair with the same focused attention she'd given to cleaning up outside. It was surreal watching her prepare to meet the woman whose life my father had shattered, as if she were getting ready for a dinner party. Mom, I said carefully, are you sure about this? Maybe we should wait, think about what we want to say. Met my eyes in the mirror's reflection. Tyler, I've been thinking about this conversation for 20 minutes. That's 20 minutes more than your father gave Catherine before he disappeared from her life. This could get ugly. It's already ugly, Mom said simply. It's been ugly for 23 years. I just didn't know it. She straightened her blouse and turned to face me. Do you have those papers Catherine showed you? Upstairs in my closet? Get them? Mom, I don't think get them, Tyler. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. I want to see everything. I hesitated for a moment, then went upstairs and retrieved the manila folder from its hiding place behind my baseball glove.
When I
came back down, Mom was waiting by the front door, her purse over her shoulder and her keys in her hand. We could drive, she said, but I think walking might give us more time to prepare. As we stepped outside, I saw Dad through the backyard gate, still standing by the grill, staring at nothing. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, like a balloon that had lost most of its air. Should we tell him where we're going? I asked. Knows where we're going, Mom replied. And he knows he's not invited. We walked down our street in silence, past the Hendersons' roses and the Patel's perfect lawn, past all the familiar landmarks of my childhood that now felt like pieces of an elaborate set designed to hide the truth. With each step, I felt the weight of the folder in my hands growing heavier, as if the secrets it contained were gaining mass. "Tyler," Mom said as we approached Catherine Street, "I need you to know that whatever happens in there, whatever we learn, it doesn't change how I feel about you. You're my son, and that's not negotiable. Even if I'm the reason Dad came back to you, or even if I exist because he felt guilty about David." Mom stopped walking and turned to face me. "Tyler Chambers, you listened to me. You were not born out of guilt. You were born out of love, maybe. Complicated love, maybe imperfect love, but love nonetheless. Regardless of the circumstances that brought your father and me back together, you were the best thing that ever happened to either of us." Her fierce certainty was exactly what I needed to hear, but it didn't eliminate the questions that had been eating at me since Catherine's revelation. "Mom," I said, as we turned onto Maple Street, "what if Dad never really got over her? What if he's been thinking about Catherine our whole lives?" Mom was quiet for a long moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice was steady but sad. "Then I guess it's time we all stopped living with ghosts." We stood at the end of Catherine's walkway, looking at the blue house where I'd learned that everything I thought I knew about my family was wrong. The same house where, in a few minutes, my mother would come face to face with the woman she'd unknowingly been competing with for over 2 decades. "Ready?" Mom asked. I wasn't. I don't think any of us were ready for what was about to happen. But ready or not, it was time for the truth. Mom knocked on Catherine's door with the same firm confidence she'd used to clean up our abandoned barbecue. 3 measured raps, then silence. I stood beside her, clutching the manila folder, my heart hammering against my ribs, when the door opened. Catherine's face went through a series of expressions in rapid successions, a surprise at seeing me again so soon, confusion at the woman standing beside me, and then a dawning recognition that made all the color drained from her cheeks. "Oh my God," she whispered, her hand moving to her throat. "Jeanette, hello, Catherine." Mom's voice was perfectly controlled, giving nothing away. "I think we need to talk." For a moment, Catherine just stood there, gripping the doorframe like it was the only thing keeping her upright, and she stepped back, opening the door wider. "Please, come in." We entered the same living room where I'd learned about David just hours earlier, but now it felt different, charged, like the air before. A thunderstorm. Catherine gestured toward the sofa, but Mom remained standing, her posture straight and defiant. "Tyler told me about your conversation today," Mom said without preamble. "About Robert, about the pregnancy, about David." Catherine's eyes filled, with tears at the mention of the name. "Janet, I never meant for you to find out this way. I never meant for you to find out at all. But you did mean for Tyler to find out." Mom's tone was calm, but carried an undercurrent of steel. "You specifically asked him to wash your car. You invited him inside. You told him things that you knew would destroy his family." "I told him the truth," Catherine said quietly. "Something his father should have done years ago. The truth." Mom let the word hang in the air. "Let me tell you what I think the truth is, Catherine. I think you've been watching my family for 15 years, nursing a grudge against a man who chose someone else over you." Catherine's face flushed. "A grudge? You think this is about jealousy, isn't it? Robert didn't just choose someone else?" Catherine's composure finally cracked. "He didn't break up with me and then start dating you. He abandoned me while I was carrying his child. He left a note on my pillow and disappeared in the middle of the night." Mom's mask of calm slipped slightly. "Tyler said you lost the baby. I'm sorry for that, truly. But that doesn't excuse what?" Catherine stepped closer, her voice rising. "Excuse telling the truth. Excuse wanting someone to know that David existed, that he mattered. You used my son to get back at my husband." The accusation hung between them like a slap. I found myself stepping forward, the manila folder still clutched in my hands. "Mom, that's not fair. Catherine is sick. She has cancer. She's not trying to get revenge. She's trying to make peace." Both women looked at me, as if they'd forgotten I was there. "Tyler's right," Catherine said, her voice softer now. "I'm not looking for revenge, Janet. I'm looking for closure. For 23 years, I've carried this secret alone. You have any idea what that's like? Watching the man who destroyed your life become a perfect husband and father to someone else? Destroyed your life! Mom's voice was incredulous. Catherine, you're a successful woman. You have a beautiful home, a career, a life. How exactly did Robert destroy that? Catherine walked to the mantel and picked up the photograph of her and my father, the same one she'd shown me earlier. She stared at it for a long moment before answering. Because every man I've ever tried to love since then has had to compete with a ghost. Because every relationship I've tried to build has crumbled under the weight of trust I lost when Robert walked away. Because I've spent over 2 decades wondering what I did wrong, what I could have done differently to make him stay. She turned to face Mom directly. You want to know what destroyed my life? It wasn't Robert leaving. It was never knowing why. It was never getting the chance to understand. What happened? It was watching him build the perfect family with you, while I wondered if David would have had his eyes, or his stubborn streak, or his terrible taste in music. The raw pain in her voice was unmistakable. Even Mom seemed affected by it, her rigid posture softening slightly. Catherine, I said quietly, maybe you should tell Mom about the journal. Catherine looked at me, then at the folder in my hands. She nodded slowly. Tyler, show her. Opened the manila folder with trembling hands and pulled out Dad's journal. Mom looked at it for a long moment before taking it from me, her fingers tracing the faded label in his handwriting. R. Chambers 2001, she read aloud. He left this behind, along with everything else, Catherine said. His clothes, his books, even his toothbrush. Like he was trying to erase himself from my life. Mom opened the journal to the first page, and I watched her face change as she began to read. The confident woman who'd marched over here demanding answers seemed to shrink with each entry. I can't stop thinking about Janet, she read quietly. What Catherine and I have is good, maybe even great. But I can't stop wondering what would have happened if I hadn't left school. Catherine sat down heavily on her chair. Keep reading. It gets worse. Mom flipped through several pages, her expression growing more stricken with each entry. When she reached the page about the pregnancy, she stopped breathing entirely. Catherine is pregnant, and all I can think about is Janet, she whispered. What kind of monster does that make me? The journal slipped from her hands and fell to the floor with a soft thud. For a moment, the room was completely silent except for the tick of Catherine's grandfather clock. He knew, Mom said finally. He knew about the baby before he left. He knew, Catherine confirmed. And he chose to leave anyway. Mom looked up at me, and I saw something in her eyes that I'd never seen before. Kind of devastation that went deeper than anger or hurt. It was the look of someone whose entire foundation had just crumbled. What is 3 years? She whispered. 23 years I've been married to a man who abandoned a pregnant woman to be with me. Janet, Catherine said gently, you didn't know. You can't blame yourself can't I? Mom's voice was sharp. Can't I blame myself for taking him back? For never questioning why he suddenly showed up at my parents' house begging for another chance? For being so flattered by his desperation that I never wondered what he was running from? She stood up abruptly and began pacing. All these years I thought I was the great love of his life. I thought our story was romantic, the college sweethearts who found their way back to each other. But I wasn't the love of his life. I was his escape route. That's not true, I said. But even as the words left my mouth, they felt hollow. Isn't it? Mom turned to face me. Tyler, think about it. Your father shows up at my parents' house 3 days after abandoning a pregnant woman, begging me to take him back. We get married 4 months later, barely enough time to plan a wedding, let alone rebuild a relationship. And then he spends the next 23 years being the perfect husband, the perfect father, never putting a foot wrong. She was right. And we all knew it. Dad's perfection, his devotion, his almost obsessive attention to family, had always seemed admirable. But now it looked like something else entirely. Guilt, Catherine said quietly. He's been living with guilt for 23 years. Mom stopped pacing and looked at her. And you've been living with grief. Every day, Catherine nodded. Watching him be the father to Tyler that he never got the chance to be to David. The mention of my name seemed to snap Mom out of her spiral. She looked at me with sudden fierce protectiveness. Tyler, I need you to understand something. Whatever your father's motivations were, whatever brought him back to me, you are not a mistake. You are not a replacement for David. You are our son, and you were wanted and loved from the moment we knew you existed. But was I? I asked quietly. Or was I just Dad's way of proving to himself that he could be a good father this time? The question hung in the air between us, unanswerable and devastating. The silence stretched between us until Catherine stood up slowly, her movements careful and deliberate. She walked to her secretary desk and pulled out something I hadn't seen before, a small, hand-knitted baby blanket in soft blue yarn. I made. "This for David," she said quietly, holding it against her chest. "After Robert left, I kept knitting, even though I knew. Even after the doctors told me the baby was gone. It was the only way I could still be his mother, even for a little while." Mom's hand flew to her mouth, tears beginning to stream down her face. "Catherine, I... ... Mom's voice broke. "I'm so sorry. I came here angry, ready to blame you for destroying my marriage, but you didn't destroy anything. I've been carrying an unbearable loss, all alone." "Not all alone," Catherine said, glancing at me. "Tyler's been watching over me for 15 years, even if he didn't know it. Every time I saw him playing in your backyard, every time he helped me with groceries or shoveled my walk in winter, it was like having a little piece of David with me." Mom moved toward Catherine slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward the blanket. Catherine nodded and handed it to her. Mom held it gently, running her fingers over the tiny, perfect stitches. "You would have been a wonderful mother," Mom said softly. "So would you have been even." "Without Robert's guilt driving him to be perfect," Catherine replied. "Janet, I've watched you raise Tyler for 15 years. The way you loved him, supported him, celebrated his achievements, that wasn't performance, that was genuine." "But was Robert's love genuine?" I asked. "Or was everything he did for me about David?" Catherine and Mom exchanged a look, and I saw understanding pass between them, two women who had both loved the same complicated man, both shaped by his choices in different ways. "Tyler," Catherine said, "I need to tell you something I probably should have mentioned earlier. There's another journal entry from about 6 months after Robert left. I found it tucked inside one of his books." She went back to the desk and pulled out a single folded piece of paper. "It's dated January 15th, 2002, a week after your parents' wedding." She unfolded it carefully. He wrote, "I married Janet today, and I should be happy. I am happy. But I can't stop thinking about Catherine and what might have been. I have to find a way to make peace with what I've done. When Janet and I have children, if we have children, I'm going to be the father I should have been to Catherine's baby. I'm going to love them so completely that maybe, somehow, it will honor the child I never got to meet." The words hit me like a physical blow, but not in the way I expected. Instead of feeling like a replacement, I felt ... honored, seen, like my father's love for me, even if it was complicated, even if it was intertwined with guilt and grief, was still real. "So I was born to honor David," I said quietly. "You were born to be loved," Mom corrected firmly. "Whatever brought your father back to me, whatever motivated him to be the parent he became, the love was real. Tyler, the pride, the joy, the late nights when you were sick, the baseball games, the homework help, that wasn't guilt. That was a father loving his son." Catherine nodded. "And Tyler, I want you to know that watching you grow up has been one of the few lights in a very dark 23 years. You have Robert's kindness and Janet's strength. You're exactly the young man David would have wanted to call his brother." The word brother broke something open in my chest. Not replacement, substitute brother. 6 months later, I'm sitting in Catherine's backyard, helping her plant a small memorial garden for David. The chemotherapy has been brutal, but she's responding well, and her doctors are cautiously optimistic. Mom stops by every Tuesday with homemade soup, and Catherine has become something I never expected. Family. Dad still struggles with what happened. He's in therapy now, working through 23 years of buried guilt. The perfect father facade has cracked, revealing someone more human and strangely more lovable. He and Catherine had a conversation 3 months ago, painful, necessary, and long overdue. She forgave him, not for his sake, but for her own. "You know," Catherine says, pressing soil around a small rose bush, "I used to think that secrets were like seeds. If you buried them deep enough, they'd never grow into anything that could hurt you. And now?" I ask, handing her the watering can. Now I know that secrets are more like weeds. The deeper you bury them, the stronger their roots become, and eventually, they'll break through and strangle everything beautiful you're trying to grow. Mom appears at the garden gate carrying a tray of iced tea. Over the past 6 months, watching her and Catherine build an unlikely friendship has been one of the most surprising developments of this whole ordeal. They've found common ground in their shared love for the man who hurt them both and their shared determination to help him heal. The garden looks beautiful, Mom says, setting down the tray. David would have loved it. Sit together in the afternoon sun, 3 people who were strangers this morning, but are now bound by truth and understanding. Catherine's cancer has taught us all that time is precious, that carrying grudges is a luxury none of us can afford. As I watch my mother and the woman who could have been my father's wife laughing over something silly, I think about the car wash that started it all. Sometimes the most ordinary moments, washing a car, knocking on a door, deciding to tell the truth, become the hinges on which entire lives turn. The secrets are finally out, and instead of destroying us, they've set us free. David's memory lives on, not as a source of pain, but as a reminder that love, even complicated love, even love born from loss, has the power to heal. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, washing your neighbor's car can change everything for the better. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.